The Indiana Jones franchise is defined by the swashbuckling archaeologist and his adventures, but Indy shouldn't get all the credit for over 4 decades of success. A hero's only as relevant as the villains he fights, and there have been some great villains in the films over the years. But which ones are the best? Let's rank the top 5 Indiana Jones villains and talk about why they deserve some love. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to like the video if you enjoy it, and if you want more content about Indiana Jones, Star Wars, entertainment, and video games, subscribe to our channel, head to our website, strangely.awesomegames.com, for even more great content. The Indiana Jones films have always had a number of similarities to the James Bond franchise, and that was an intentional move by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Indy had a different love interest in most films, which is a clear nod to the James Bond formula. Another way they're similar to the Bond movies is that the villains are more strategic, diabolical, and evil than they are physically violent. Bond villains have henchmen do their dirty work, and so do Indy villains. But that doesn't mean they aren't dangerous, as we'll see here on the list. By the way, we'll do henchmen in another list, but for now we're just focusing on the big bads of Indiana Jones. So don't comment asking why, like Tote isn't here from Raiders of the Lost Ark or the Chief Guard from Temple of Doom. We'll get to them, don't worry, it'll just be in a later video. Starting us off at number 5 is Dr. Irina Spalko from Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Spalko isn't a bad villain. We're just going to say that she's the least awesome on the list. In fact, in many ways, she's the perfect villain for that film, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The film reflected American culture and the global political landscape in the 1950s, so it was chock full of Cold War references and callbacks. The Red Scare was alive and well in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, as Indy suspected of being a communist sympathizer and fired from his job at Marshall College. The era was full of fears of Soviet mind control because it's easier to think that your perceived enemy is controlling the minds of anyone who doesn't agree with you, and Spalko fits this perfectly. She sees knowledge as the treasure in Crystal Skull and is seen at a couple of different times in the film trying to manipulate the mind of Indiana Jones. She's not only cerebral either. Cate Blanchett's portrayal includes Spalko being an expert with the sword. This plays out in a great duel with Mutt, who had taken lots of fencing lessons while on the race to Akator. Like most Indiana Jones villains, she's done in by her greed and lust for power. We've said she's pretty great, so why is Spalko so low on the list? In Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it just feels like the villains are just as much within the United States as they are, external rivals like Spalko. Indy has just as much of a fight with Cold War hysteria and ridiculous conspiracies as he does with the Russians, which makes Spalko take a backseat as a threat at different times in the film. Number 4 is Walter Donovan from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Okay, I know some in the comments will disagree with where Donovan's placed here, but hear me out. Donovan is diabolical and he's driven by greed like many other Indy villains. But all he is rich and selfish. He has no great knowledge of what he sees. He's willing to pay off anyone to get it. His big ability is having lots of money. He's basically like if Bruce Wayne was an evil asshole. We hit on this in our video about Donovan, but the philanthropist and Nazi sympathizer is more a mirror to Indy's father in The Last Crusade than he is to Indiana Jones himself. The story of two different paths to the Grail is fascinating and makes for a great story. Henry spending a lifetime learning about the Grail and still not feeling worthy of it when he finally holds it, versus Donovan trying to buy his way to it and not earning the prize. It's a compelling narrative, but I prefer when the villain is a contrast to Indy himself instead of one of the other protagonists in the film. In Last Crusade, the contrast to Indy is Elsa, but she doesn't find her way to this list because she does somewhat redeem herself at the end, and she's never the big bad at any point in the film. She has her own motivations, but is always doing someone else's bidding. Donovan wanted the power of the Grail brought, but had no respect for the artifact itself. He was wealthy and powerful and thought he deserved to live forever because of it. That's why he's here on the list. The better villains, even Spalko, have a real respect for what they're pursuing. Donovan beats out Spalko because he's written a little bit better and because Last Crusade is a decidedly better story overall. At number 3, we have Jürgen Voller from Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Look, we know Dial of Destiny is probably the most divisive Indiana Jones film, but Jürgen Voller is a pretty compelling villain. The first thing going for him is that he's played by the excellent Mads Mikkelsen, who seems a perfect choice for the type of villain that Voller is. Remember earlier when we said that Indy villains often have things in common with Bond villains? Turns out casting choices do too, as both Mads Mikkelsen and Julian Glover played Bond villains. Mikkelsen in 2006's Casino Royale and Glover in 1981's For Your Eyes Only. Voller gets ahead of Donovan on the list because he's more than just rich. He's an ex-Nazi who's still a Nazi, but also a brilliant scientist who came to America as part of Operation Paperclip after World War II. Voller respects the power of the Antikythera, but that isn't what gets him to the middle of the list. The most fascinating thing about him is that he's a Nazi and bad guy who wants to go back to 1939 not to save Adolf Hitler but to kill him to help change the course of the war and have Germany win. By doing that, he thinks Germany wins the war if Hitler's dead, and the Nazi Party will reign across the globe. Voller's cold-hearted and pure evil, and he's willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to achieve that goal. The contrast between how he and Indy each come to terms with their place in the world after their prime years is a great story driver as well. Plus, how many people could survive this blow that would literally kill anyone else? He's absolutely the GOAT. Number 2 is Mola Ram from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom has its issues, we know that, but it's still a fun adventure and a complete thrill ride. Part of the reason it's fun is Mola Ram, a villain who's so badass he's number 2 on our list even though he's only in half the movie. You only learn his name by listening closely, but Mola Ram is both cunning and evil, and that's why he lands so highly on the list. What makes him such an evil adversary for Indy? Well, he steals children from villages to work in mines for him, for starters. He's also a religious cult leader, so he believes strongly in a cause as justification for his evil deeds, which is far more dangerous than someone just after money or power. His henchmen are true believers too, or at least they are after he forces them to drink the blood of Kali, which puts them in the black sleep of Kali, a trance-like state where the subject will blindly follow Mola Ram's bidding. If all that isn't enough for you, there's the fact that he rips out the hearts of people and sacrifices them to Kali by lowering them into a pit of lava, while people cheer. This dude is a brand of evil not seen elsewhere in Indiana Jones movies. Mola Ram is expertly played by famed Bollywood actor Amrish Puri, who Spielberg was actually a huge fan of. The final showdown between Mola Ram and Indiana Jones on the bridge is one of the best moments in the entire franchise, too. And at number 1, we'll go back to the beginning. It's Renee Belloc from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders is a classic adventure movie, and Renee Belloc is a classic Indiana Jones villain. From the start of Raiders of the Lost Ark, he seems one step ahead of Indiana Jones the whole time. While they're bitter rivals, there's also a weird kind of professional respect between the two, which makes Belloc an even better villain. Belloc's biggest attribute as a villain is that he's every bit Indy's equal when it comes to archaeological knowledge. But while he shares the same intellect, he's willing to take steps that Indy isn't in order to win. For example, he aligns himself with Nazis. That's pretty bad. Indy wouldn't do that. I think my favorite thing about Belloc, though, is that he seems, at times, to not be that bad of a guy. As an example, he seems to care for Marion and not want any harm to come to her. He also sympathizes with Indy at least a little bit when Marion is feared dead. But then, he'll turn on a dime and say or do the most cold, heartless thing to reinforce that he's actually quite evil. Belloc's probably the best contrast to Indy throughout the entire series, as he is Indy's archaeological equal, but his motives and methods are the opposite of Indy's. Plus, his death scene is one of the very best, if not the best, villain deaths in all of Indiana Jones. What do you think? Which villain is the best in all of Indiana Jones? Let us know in the comments. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more content on Indy, Star Wars, video games, and entertainment. Also, head to our website, strangeawesomegames.com, and if you enjoy this type of content, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/strangelyawesome. Have a great day, everybody.